Hello and welcome back. I do hope that you have had the opportunity to access the first movie and then make some comments on our forum. In the first little movie, I shared the learning outcomes for my section of the Junior ME PD Day on Friday the 24th of November. This movie focuses on the first of those learning outcomes. Describe the principles of effective learning and teaching in the context of the General Practice Vocational Training Program. In the forum, I asked you to list your thoughts about what is happening when learning for you is effective, or alternatively, you could have flipped it and thought about a time when teaching felt good. And I'm wondering, as I'm making this movie before I've released these resources to you, what words and phrases you might have used. If you approach that task from the perspective of a learner, you might have jotted down some of these phrases. You might have said that learning is effective and comfortable for you when it's relevant, when you get feedback, when you get the opportunity to work with others, when there's an element of fun, you're supported, you have some element of control and input, it's hands-on, maybe online suits you, and perhaps you particularly like it when the teacher knows their stuff. But let's take a moment to compare what we think with educational theory. Now, as you may well know, a theory is, supposedly, a well-substantiated explanation. Learning theory seeks to understand how people learn, providing guiding principles and concepts, a framework, if you like, that helps us improve the quality of an educational program. Theories on how people learn are not new. And if we look at what the respected experts think about effective learning, people such as Piaget, Bruner, Vygotsky, and Skinner, despite their differences, there are many themes, similarities such as learning is more effective when the learner's experience and existing skills are acknowledged and used, when learning is made relevant and meaningful, where the learner is involved and actively participating, they have opportunities to test, practice and reflect, they learn with others, they receive encouragement, support and feedback, and there are high expectations yet achievable goals. So now let's look briefly at teaching. What work has been done in developing principles of effective teaching? You might recognize this man and his movie, Dead Poets Society. In the real world, Professor John Hattie is well known across the primary, secondary and higher education sectors. He has worked nationally and internationally and is most influential in education in Australia. Mind you, as you might expect, John has his naysayers. However, I do think we can learn from his vast work, in particular his work around the value of the teaching role and how he differentiates between the experienced and the expert teacher. John would hold that the experts know their stuff and the nuances of teaching their particular topic. They come with a toolkit that they're able to apply depending on the situation. They're unconsciously competent, yet they do reflect and look for new ideas. They have high levels of energy and regard for teaching and learning. They have high expectations and encourage deep learning. And they engage in reciprocal learning, that is, learning together, teacher and learner. John Biggs and Catherine Tang have also worked widely in the field of learning and teaching, particularly in the higher education sector. They have proposed a model that describes levels of thinking about teaching, and there is a quiz you can complete on Mel that would provide more information. Feel free to have a go, but it's not necessary. Level 1 is about blame. It's the learner's fault. They're either a good student or a bad student. My job as the teacher is to deliver the content. The good learners will get it, the bad learners won't. Level 2 is more about what I do as a teacher. I see student learning as my responsibility, and I have to work hard to build a toolkit full of strategies. At level 3, I see the purpose of teaching as supporting learning. That is, I need to clearly identify the outcomes to be achieved, the level of learning, and the nature of the learning and teaching activities required to achieve those levels and understandings. It's not what we do, but what students do that is important. So you might think that level 3 is where you should be. But there will be times when level 1 and 2 teaching and or supervising occur. Think about situational teaching, where you pay attention to the environment, the timing, the content and the learner. You need to have the preparedness to modify your style and methodology to get the best out of each situation. So if I were to summarize the themes, even from those two sources, and they are representative of many, although, again, there are differing schools of thought, we might come up with a list like this. Teaching is more effective when you are vocationally competent and current, that you are learner-centered, that you have a preparedness to modify your style and your strategies depending on the situation, you're energetic and enthusiastic, and you are a reflective practitioner. And if we combine the two lists together, we can come up with our own principles of learning and teaching. Now, I probably moved on from that list fairly quickly, but we will come back to it. I just want to share 4 other thoughts. So we've talked about effective learning, we've talked about effective teaching. There are 4 other concepts I'd just like to mention. Sometimes when we are teaching, we are so intent on the learning outcomes and our session plan that we miss important teaching and learning opportunities, a teachable moment. These occur often unexpectedly when the registrar's interest is piqued, when curiosity abounds and the motivation to engage is high. If appropriate, I would encourage you to make the most of these moments. The term teachable moment is also regularly found in the literature in relation to motivational interviewing and educating your patients. A lemon tree. Why on earth have I got a picture of a lemon tree? Well, because I'm going to use it to help me explain the zone of proximal development. And you may well have heard that term before and have an understanding of what it means, but I will go through it again. This is a child who's in the zone of proximal development. Although they can't ride a bike, they now know that that skill exists. And they're motivated. They've gone into the shed and dragged the bike out, even got it to the top of the drive, although it is on its side. And they've worked out that they need a helmet, and it seems that they've even managed to get that helmet on. The child is interested, the child is motivated, they're in that zone of proximal development. Our role now as a teacher or a parent is to provide the scaffolding. That is, what is the support we can provide that learner during this zone of proximal development so that they can actually master that skill. In this instance, it's running along behind, hanging on to the seat. And sometimes we'll see it as trainer wheels. And as the child gets a little bit more proficient, we lift one of the wheels up so they have to start getting that initial sense of balance. That's scaffolding. And over time, we can remove the training wheels, we can stop hanging onto the seat as the child or the learner becomes more confident, until eventually they're really unconsciously competent, and that is they just hop on a bike and ride. So a fairly rudimentary description of the zone of proximal development and the purpose of scaffolding. And back to the lemon tree. So it's like when you go to pick a lemon and it doesn't come, and in fact you pull and eventually the branch comes off. That lemon wasn't ready. The zone of proximal development for a lemon is when you go to the tree, you grab the lemon and it just comes easy. And I think the zone of proximal development is important to keep in mind, that learning is always more effective, it's easier, it's more comfortable when they're ready to learn. They know the skill exists, they know the relevance, the importance, the place of it, and they're keen. So very similar to that teachable moment is that notion of the zone of proximal development, and then the support, the scaffolding that we provide until they master that skill. So we've briefly touched on the notion of the teachable moment, the zone of proximal development, and scaffolding. And we'll finish with a short conversation around preferred learning styles. I'm sure you're familiar with that notion. Important to note that there's research that both support and denounce the usefulness of preferred learning styles. But I just want to talk to you about one in particular that I think we can use quite successfully. Successfully wasn't really the word I wanted to use, but I've recorded that slide about 10 times and I'm not doing it again. So what I meant to say was that this model, VAK, I think can be quite useful. Visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. So theoretically, if you buy into preferred learning styles, they would hold that visual learners like to see and to read. Auditory like to listen, but because it's listening, they also need to speak to be able to clarify. And that kinesthetic people like to touch and do. So for me, when I'm preparing a teaching session, one easy check is for me to go, what have I done for my visual learners? So have I got something for them to look at, something that's visually stimulating? The auditory learners, they don't want to just listen to what I've got to say, like you poor people are doing now, but they want to ask questions. So have I allowed for discussion? And the kinesthetic learners, am I moving people around? Am I getting them to touch and do? Have they got pen? Have they got paper? Have they got activity? So again, I'm not buying in 100% to the notion of preferred learning styles. I'm simply using one framework, VAK, to check my session plan and to check what I'm doing as a teacher. Okay, so in this little movie, we've looked at the principles of effective learning. Then we've added in some ideas around good teaching. We've looked at 4 other concepts: the teachable moment, the zone of proximal development, scaffolding, and finally, very briefly, preferred learning styles. 2 more thoughts I'd like to leave you with: the importance of the learning environment and that it is inviting, and the power of educators, of teachers actually working together. And so let's just revisit that long list. Remember that if we were to put all of these theories and theorists through a funnel, these are the sorts of themes that appear. That learning and teaching is more efficient or more effective when the experienced existing skills of knowledge of the learners are acknowledged and used, that when the learning is made relevant, there's purpose, it's meaningful, that the learners are actively engaged and participating, they have opportunities to test, practice and reflect, that they get to learn with others, so that notion of social learning, they receive encouragement, support and feedback, there are high expectations, there's challenge, yet the goals are achievable, that the teachers are vocationally competent and current, they know their stuff, they know how to teach their topic, they have a learner-centered approach which is situational, they're able to change their methodology, use different strategies depending on the situation, they have high levels of energy, enthusiasm, and of course they are reflective practitioners themselves. It's no wonder that when we start the day we're like plump peaches and at the end of it we're like shriveled up prunes. Okay, so in this little movie we've been focused on the learning outcome, described the principles of effective learning and teaching in the context of the General Practice Vocational Training Program. And we have done it very quickly, so I've provided 3 articles on MEL that you're more than welcome to access. You may have resources of your own that deal with similar concepts that we have in this format. The pen is there. If there was anything that this movie covered or addressed that particularly resonated with you, or something that sparked your interest, or even something that you wanted to know more about or you disagreed with, please make a note and bring that to the session on Friday, and I will check in with you at the start of that session. Or you can go back into the forum, the previous forum, and add a comment there. That would be perfectly fine too. Okay, so after this, yes, there's some readings for you to access. There's also another little movie. I hope you can find the time to look at that one. It looks at learning and teaching principles as we apply it to the whole program. And then on the Friday morning when we're together, I actually won't be in the room, I'll be in there via webinar. We'll look at applying all of this to the session planning process. Okay, cheers.